Welcome to another episode. I know you guys are thinking real estate and divorce. How do you put those two together? How do you separate those two? Well, that's the whole point of this conversation that we're going to have. My special guest today is Michael Freed. Michael, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be on your show.
You know what? Let's just dive into it. People want to know more about you. Tell us about your background. Who are you? How long you been in the business?
So, my name is Michael Freed. I'm a partner in the firm of Berkman, Botker, Newman, and Shine. We practice exclusively in the area of matrimonial and family law. We handle all aspects of divorce, custody, child support, spousal maintenance, equitable distribution, orders of protection, and we also do prenuptial and postnuptial agreements. And I basically handle the litigation for the firm. So I do a lot of the court appearances, the depositions, and the trial work.
All right, so let's just dive in. Basically, we're going to start the conversation with I'm looking at my notes right now. When couples begin a divorce process, when is the right time for them to start thinking about what they need to do with the home or other real estate that they might have or own together?
So that begins at the very, very beginning. And a lot of times when we have an initial consultation, if I have a consultation with a prospective client, first I'm trying to educate them on the law. And specifically, when it comes to the real estate, I explain that there are two types of property in New York: marital property and separate property. So, marital property is anything that you acquire from the date of the marriage up until the start of a divorce, and that is divisible at the time of a divorce. But separate property is anything that's acquired prior to the marriage or by gift or inheritance at any time, and that's excluded from the marital estate. So when people talk about real estate, they're saying to me, well, this is my property. And I say, well, it may be, but it may be your spouse's too, because that's when, it depends on when it was acquired. So at the very beginning of the case, I will ask them about when they acquired their property, also the source of funds to acquire, if they got it through an inheritance. Maybe they got it from money from prior to the marriage. And also, I'll ask about contributions during the marriage towards improvements to the home. So we'll have all these discussions, and it's always important to talk about what do you want to do with the house at the end of the day, because it really becomes more of, can you afford the house after the divorce? So one of the things I tell my clients they're going to need to do is prepare what's called a statement of net worth. And it's a sworn document which lists your income, your assets, your liabilities, but most importantly, it lists your expenses, your monthly expenses. And can you afford to live in the home based upon what your income is and what your expenses are? And that's going to tell a lot as to whether or not we're going to decide if we're just going to put the house on the market, or maybe we're going to talk about a buyout where one party is going to buy out the other's 50% share of the equity, or maybe somebody stays in the home until the youngest child turns 18 or graduates from high school, which is a case I'm dealing with right now, where somebody's equity is being held up for a certain period of time until the child is old enough to be out of the house. Well, sure, because one of the most important things is being organized. When you're going through a divorce, it's a very stressful time. But when we're dealing with the real estate, I want my clients to gather up documents. So I want them to get the deed. I want them to get us the closing statement from, let's say, the purchase of the prior home, to see where how much money was spent on the home, what was the source of the money. There'll be the checks. I can see the checks. Also, just I want to know the pay down of the mortgage. Who's paying the mortgage from what source? So the more the information and documentation you have, the better it is.
All right, that leads me to my next question. We're talking about prenups and postnuptial agreements. How can somebody help? How can these help couples avoid misunderstandings about their real estate down the line?
Sure. So prenuptial and postnuptial agreements, we're dealing with, let's talk about prenuptial agreements first. Those are agreements that parties can sign before they get married, and it can set forth what's going to happen with the real estate. Since we're talking about real estate here, what's going to happen with first of all, the classification of the asset. What if you buy a house during the marriage, is it going to be deemed a separate property or marital property? And some people will want to do a prenuptial agreement based upon what they call tracking the law, which is what the law is, what I just described. So title is irrelevant. But other people, because you can opt out of the law basically when you do a prenuptial agreement, and you could say, you know what, I want to do what's called title controls, meaning that I'm married to my wife and we have a prenuptial agreement that's title controls. Okay, if I purchase a home in my sole name, now under the law, it's marital property because anything that's acquired during the marriage is marital. But in a title controls agreement, if I put that home in my sole name in a title controls prenuptial agreement, that home is going to stay my separate property. Okay. And the only way it would be marital property is if I put it in joint names with my wife. So a prenuptial agreement allows you to have a little more of a say in terms of how assets, especially real estate, will be divided in the event of a divorce. It could also have an impact on, let's say, during the marriage, you have a separate property home, but you contribute marital assets to the improvement of the home. So then we talk about credits. So the party that is the non-titled spouse but contributes marital property should get a 50% credit for any monies they contribute in marital money. Let's take the other scenario where you have a separate property home and you contribute, or let's say a marital property home and you contribute your separate property. So if you contribute your separate property to a marital home, the part contributes their separate property should get 100% credit because it's their money, their separate property that they're contributing. So prenuptial agreements can make it in a very organized fashion, can determine what you do with the property in the event of a divorce, as compared to if you don't have a prenuptial agreement, you then have to work this out at the time of the divorce. And we can also determine how long somebody stays in the home. So let's say my wife, we have children, and it's my separate property home, but I'm not going to want her to leave the home if she's there with the kids. So you can make provisions as to who stays in the home in the event there's children. Now, if there are no children, then it's easy. It's my separate property. But I may want to have a provision because I don't want to kick my kids out in the cold. Wanted them to stay in the home if at all possible. So prenuptial agreements give you a lot of that, gives you a lot of flexibility. And then postnuptial agreements is pretty much the same, except it's executed after the marriage and it will still provide the same protection, but it's done when you don't have enough time to do the prenuptial agreement.
So when you say post-nuptial, if I understand this correctly, so after the marriage has ended, or basically after you said I do?
No, right. After the I do's, then you want to put into place what's going to happen in the event of a divorce. The only difference between a prenuptial agreement and a postnuptial agreement, prenuptial agreement is signed before the wedding, and we normally want to do it 3 to 4 months before. I usually don't like to have agreements prepared right before, like a day before the marriage, because then one party may be under pressure. So if it's
Yes.
that close to the wedding, I may just say, hey, let's do a postnuptial agreement, put the same provisions in, but without all that pressure.
Well, that brings me to my next question. What should someone know about in this, including in their property for this kind of agreement, especially if they're planning to buy a house together?
Yeah. So again, if you're doing the prenuptial agreement, you have to decide how are we going to classify the property. If we're doing a title controls situation where it's whoever owns the house, whoever's titled to the house owns it and will keep it, then the parties will need to know, okay, if we want to buy property and we want to keep it separate, it's got to be put into one of our names. But if, on the other hand, we want to make it where everything is marital, then we'll say, okay, let's put it into joint names. So that's one of the things we would want to know in the event of a with doing a prenuptial agreement. We want to know, how is the home going to be classified? Is it going to be classified as marital property or separate property? And then again, during the marriage, we want to know, is like, if we're going to contribute separate property, are we going to get 100% credit? Or if we're going to contribute marital property to a separate property asset, do we get 50% of the credit?
I'm listening to everything you're saying, like, wow, I didn't realize so much stuff went into this. And knowing this information, I'm glad we got together to collaborate and do a video like this because I want people to know what they're getting into and so
Yeah,
they can make better choices and they have options. They always have options. So
definitely.
that being said, if in your experience, how do divorcing couples typically approach the question of whether they're going to sell a home or keep it?
So a lot of it depends on the family dynamics. So of course, children have a big impact on that. So I've had cases where the parties come to my office for a divorce, and they're saying, all right, well, we have a 2-year old and a 4-year old. What should we do? And I'll say, well, because they're so young and they don't have roots in the community, it might just be easier to sell. But the harder cases are the ones where you have children of, like, let's say 12, 13, 14, and they have roots in the community and they don't want to move and they're old enough to know and they have friends in the area. That's where it gets a little dicier. And those are situations where we may say, you know what, maybe hold off selling until there's uh, a transition event. Maybe it's where the child moving from middle school to high school or high school to college, and hold off. The only problem is that the one party that is going to be out of the house, they don't have their share of the equity. It's being held up until there's a sale. But children really have an impact on that. So that's one issue. The other is simply finances. There may not be enough money. I've had plenty of instances where I'll tell my client, I know you are attached to this house. I know you love the house, but how are you going to afford living there down the road? Unless we can get you enough in child support and maintenance, and you're not earning enough income, you're not going to be able to afford the house, because now we're talking about two households being able to support two people now have two different residences. How are they going to be able to afford that home when it used to be two people for one home? So there's economics that go along with it. So I think the two biggest issues is in terms of the family dynamics with the children and the actual economics, being able to afford living in the home.
All right, so we talked about emotional situations and financial situations. When people are considering basically going this route, what's a piece of advice you can give them? You pretty much said pretty much have a conversation or have an open dialogue between all parties. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Just that it's important to be organized and know your facts, know what the situation is in terms of who's been paying the mortgage. Because one of the other factors in the divorce is that if one party's been paying the mortgage since the divorce started, and when we talk about from what we call the commencement of the action with divorce, divorces sometimes could take 1 to 2 to 3 years. And if somebody is paying down the mortgage principal, let's say they spend $30,000, spent down the mortgage principal over a 3-year period, they should get at least 50%, a 50% credit for that pay down of the principal balance of the mortgage. So it's always important to keep good records. You know what the source of the funds for paying the mortgage down. Also, in terms of repairs, where is that money coming from? Is it coming from a marital account or a separate account? So these are all things that, as matrimonial lawyers, we look at every day. And it really, I always stress the importance of clients being as organized as possible, because it's very easy to lose records. And it's so important to be able to, as a client, to work with me and be as organized as possible, because the more organized you are, the better prepared you are.
Speaking about preparation, that preparation will help you with being stable or having some stability basically within this process. You already mentioned basically having a conversation. I mentioned that as well. In all my videos, I keep saying always have an open book, have a conversation with your professionals. That way they can best guide you with whatever you're looking to do. This also helps when stabilizing the family unit itself. Even though you might be going separate routes, you still want to keep it as stable as possible. Is there anything that you want to add to that?
No, I think again, everything is it's all about organization, and it's a difficult time for the clients, and they're going through a transition, not only themselves but a lot of times the children. What I will sometimes tell clients that are so attached to their homes and they have children, I'll say, sometimes it's good for a fresh start, even for the children. And I'll tell them, give the children a role in the wherever they end up in a new home. Tell them that they can even design their own rooms and things like that, just to give them, because it is an emotional divorce is extremely emotional and stressful, and not only dealing with all these issues of custody, but actually, where are these people going to live? And for a child, it's the hardest thing. They're so used to their room, they're used to their familiar surroundings, and then to have to move. And look, children are the innocent victims here. They didn't bargain for the divorce. So it's always important to put their interests first, and even talk to them about ways that things are going to be great in the new home, and you'll have all the different things you can design, how you want your room. There's ways of working through this to better transition the children to their new surroundings.
Well, that leads me to my next question is pretty much how does a role of an agent like myself, how can we help couples going through a divorce related transitions, especially with the family? And you just mentioned with the kids, I try and include everybody in the conversation and follow their lead. But what's other ways that I, myself, or any other agent who's watching this can help?
Well, I will say the most important thing for you as an agent is to be as patient as possible. This is not your typical sale, because the stress level is going up tremendously. And the big you guys can help us as matrimonial attorneys the most by being organized and say, okay, well, we need to get a list price. So let's get this list price. Let's not delay things. Talk about, what you think in terms of the house when you first go through it. What needs to be there has to be some changes, some repairs. What How can our clients maximize their home in terms of the sale price? What needs to be done? And doing it in this orderly fashion, because again, our clients are in 20 different directions and they need guidance. So, helping the way that you can help us is to find ways in which value can be maximized, and doing it in an orderly fashion.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I'm like, yep, we're doing that, we're doing that, we're doing that. All right, we definitely have to sharpen our tools basically to make sure we take care of our clients. When the legal and real estate sides communicate well, which is my thing, always have the conversation. What kinds of differences does that make for the client? I know my answer. I want to hear your answer.
Well, it makes every bit of difference. It is everything. When there's harmony between the real estate agent and the matrimonial attorney working together for a common cause, it makes everything go so much smoother. Because look, that's not my area of expertise. I'm relying on you as the real estate agent to tell me, what should this house list for? What are we looking at here in terms of list price? And also, if it's staying on the market for a certain period of time, maybe that we should drop the price at a certain time. Or, maybe we can talk about accepting a list price within a certain percentage of the list price. So these are all things that I lean on you as the real estate agent to help me. Okay. So that is so important, so vital to resolving these issues.
All right. Honestly, we've covered a lot of things. I guess the next thing I'm going to have to say to the audience is basically, look, this is a difficult situation, but it's not impossible. You have professionals that can help you, guide you throughout the process. Michael, what's an encouraging piece of advice that you would give or share with someone who's currently going through a divorce, is unsure about the real estate situation?
Sure. You have to think long term. You can't just look at things in a vacuum. You have to say, well, okay, yeah, I can afford the home for the next few months. That's only going to get you for the next few months. You need to look at what are my anticipated expenses if I have children and they're going to get older and their needs are going to increase. How do I balance that against paying the mortgage, the real estate taxes, the utilities? So it's always important, and I tell my clients all the time, look to the future. And even if you need to speak with a financial advisor to figure out, can I carry this home for the next 10, 15, 20 years? You need to do that. And you can't just look at it in a vacuum and look at it in 1 year. You need to look at for the next 20, 30 years, can I afford it? And if you can't, you then come to the realization, hey, it's okay, let's sell and then we'll downsize. And then, I'll speak with a real estate agent and figure out where's the best place for me to live that I can afford, right? So
All right,
that's
well,
my advice.
I love that. I was going to say the same exact thing. Just have the conversation, find a professional, find somebody who has your interest best in the heart, basically, and your family, the whole family. With that being said, Michael, how can they reach you if they want to have a consultation with you?
So if anybody's they have questions on divorce and they're looking for a consultation, feel free to contact me. You can email me at mfried@berkbot.com. That's MFRIED at BERKBOT.com. I'm also active on LinkedIn. So just look for my name, Michael Fried. I also have a podcast, 5 Minutes with Freed, which is on my LinkedIn page. So you could check those out. And the name of the firm again is Berkman, Botker, Newman, and Shine. And our website is www.berkbot.com.
Mike, I want to say thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy schedule to do this with us. I'm Evantz Saint-Gerard. I want to be your real estate resource for anybody who's watching this. If you have questions, we're here to answer those questions. Feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, pretty much everywhere. You're going to look for me as Evantz Sells Homes. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, 917-975-5985. I'm a New Yorker. I do talk too fast. I'm going to slow it down. 917-975-5985. If you found some value out of this, please feel free to share this with any friends, family, anybody going through a situation. Please remember, you're not alone. We're here to help. That's what we're here for. With that being said, thank you so much. Remember, like, share, and subscribe, and see you soon.